Okay, today we look at something wonderful. We're going to look at the last couple of videos made by Egyptologist 7. She asked me a few weeks back if I would get in on this guy because she had a couple of other pokers in the fire, and I started to. And I made once watching the video, I actually made a hour and 20-minute video on literally the first 16 minutes of what he said, by all the things I had to show and say. Then I made a second one, and I really didn't get too far into it before she put out this video. And I'm thinking, I got a second one's an hour and 22, but I could probably make that about 35 minutes if I just threw in her 6-minute or 6.5-minute video here in place of a lot of things I try to say and show, because she actually uses his own attempt against him by finding the original video. I'm here to tell you she's not a girl to be messed with. She knows her stuff and can easily rake over the coals and find something that really stands out well. This first video was called Afrocentrics Can Only Scream Victory When They Deliberately and Intentionally Edit and Delete Valuable Anthropological Information that crushes the narrative of that fake Black Egypt, and that it's blatant. And I thought about starting the other video and just mentioning this and have you look at it, but I'm going to show you one piece of it. And if you haven't seen it, go to Egyptologist 7's channel. Look up this one that she has on the King's Monologue. That's this guy. He's Afrocentric, and he's put himself, of course, as kings. And the King's Monologue. Omission of information is deceit. To be ambiguous is a lie. We'll get into that a little more, but I want you to see one of the important moments here. She starts off right off the bat doing her fencing with a heart stab. Just took her. Take a look here.
But some scholars now believe Cleopatra and her siblings had African blood. Could the answer be in this skull?
The distance from the forehead to the back of the skull is long in relation to the overall height of the cranium, and that's something that you see quite frequently in certain populations, one of which is ancient Egyptians. Another would be Black African groups. Will
Also, it might be this guy here on the left looking at his head, but let's continue.
Show that characteristic. This one certainly looks more Whyte European, Whyte European, Whyte European. This one certainly looks more Whyte European.
It's quite an achievement, really, that Afrocentrism could be so desperate to scavenge for non-existent connections in Europe to prove Egyptians were black via the Whyte European skull that they try to show from the Greek city of Ephesus up in Turkey, or what we call Turkey today. And yet somehow this is proof of an Egyptian connection somehow. This is all, of course, having to do with Cleopatra's current representation that they tried to pull off, where, I don't know if you've noticed, but they tried to make all the Egyptians West Sub-Saharan Bantu. And then they also said, well, Queen Cleopatra too. And what they said in that was that the justification was that her grandmama told her something one time, that I don't care what they say in school, Cleopatra was black. Well, little did, I guess, her grandma even know that Cleopatra was from after Alexander the Great and part of the Ptolemaic dynasties. And of course had nothing to do with it. But the other part is more concerning, where they try to pretend that all the Egyptians were black somehow. And if you notice, they actually tried to make Ptolemy Cleopatra's father, also a sub-Saharan Bantu. It's really self-exposing, and it's brought these things to light, and so while they are, maybe we ought to talk about them and show these things. So I grabbed a few more of these Afrocentrics saying things in recent videos, like they were the Amerindians, insulting the Indians. They were the Olmecs, they were this, they were that. And working on one right now where they try to say they were the Greeks. And you ought to see these pictures they tout along with the idea. You would think it was so foolish, but yet blacks like this type of thing. They really, really desperately, if somebody will make up a little video and just say that they weren't themselves, they're all over it. Let's take a look at her new video now that she takes and tears them apart with by using their own sources. This one right here was done using that, where they showed a video point and they go, see, even the white lady's saying it. Well, what does she say? Well, I clipped it off right before she said, this skull is a Whyte European. Oops. And that's actually deceitful and omission of the information that's shown there. That's why she talks about desperately scavenging for something and then turning around and trying to play with it. Just like they take the art and over contrast it and cut out the pale women and all kinds of things and try to find a statue with a nose knocked off and see if they can get you to believe that that one time had a big, big nose on it. A big flat nose. Let's look into this. Here's the new video.
In a study of 2,861 Egyptian skulls spanning the pre-dynastic and all dynasties, well over 95% of Egyptian skulls were classified as dolichocephalic.
Now what has happened here is also in his video for more proof. He wants to try to say that the Egyptians, they all had this dolichocephalic skull. And notice in this video, KM, King's Monologue, does not provide the source of his claim. This is an intentional sneaky tactic that Afrocentrics engage in because they have something to hide that's part of the information, because if you got a hold of the whole paper, you'd find that, well, it almost looks like the next sentence. They say something like, but blacks were never in Egypt, and they definitely want to cut that out. This also exposes the fact that they know the information and they're just desperately trying to lie. It's not like they went down a rabbit hole and found something different and went, huh? No. They found that and then they went, how can I do this to make it pull off the lie that I want? It's real self-exposing. Let's get into this as we look at this prognostic skull over here on the left, which is actually a typical sub-Saharan African skull and not at all like a Caucasoid skull. And they show that at the point. They've even taken to starting to show prognathism and then try to say that it was in Egypt in ancient times. Why? Because they know they have that trait, a more simian, less advanced trait. And so they tried to mish that in there. What's hilarious is all the cranial data goes in a lack of prognathism. And they just really don't like that. So they clip that out too. But let's go on here. So they do this type of tactic because their sources reveal information that they don't want their audience to see, as I was saying. And in running a search for the number 2,861 diocephalatic, she found the source paper of it. And I want you to realize when it comes from, back in 1938. But this is from other papers that are all correlating with craniomical data that's used. You see, before they had genetics and stuff, which has also come on and really trumped the situation. That's the type of thing that they had, where they can compare skulls. And so somebody could grab a European skull and compare it to these skulls or those skulls and see the difference of which. It's actually how we form the idea of races, not on just visual cortex, but all of these other factors which are still in play and still legitimate, although in the modern UN type of look, and we're all kumbaya together somehow. They're trying to actually, believe it or not, take away the fact of that there's any races or difference between anybody. And then they're also trying to say that, well, there's no real male and female, whenever somebody that's into archaeology like this can walk up to a skeleton, take a look at its midriff area, and tell you if it's a woman within seconds, in most cases, especially if she's ever had a child. And that pelvis is going to look totally different. There are a lot of other ways to do it, and like 9 regions of the skull to go off of, and all kinds of things which show you the reality of which ones these people are looking at and where they got their knowledge from. And it's being repeatedly validated. Some people tried to pull off the idea that, oh, they were racist and they were this and they were that or something else. No, they were telling the truth as far as they knew it at that time, running off of craniometry. And it's been backed up over and over and over and over again, and especially with genetics coming in. Let's continue. She found it. Huh. There's this paper.
Strong dolichocephaly is typical of southern Nilotic African populations, such as the Kalenjin and Maasai, whose cephalic index of 73% is virtually identical to that of the ancient Egyptians.
So what does this paper say that he used? You're going to like number 3. Actually, you're going to like all of this. Each part I can go into a piece of it, but her topics and points outs of this paper show you that modern Egyptians descend from ancient Egyptians. It's been something that's been said also in genetic papers that they had wondered whenever they did all the Abu Sir El Melek necropolis, that they were looking to see if there was a difference that came along at different times. Like, did anything change whenever they had the Persians come in, or the Libyans before that, or after that, having the time of Alexander the Great and the Greeks and so on like that? And what was amazing, the paper came out and said, no, we don't see any real change until way after the post-Roman periods. And one of the discernations that make them not have a connection now to the ancients is that sub-Saharan admix showed up that time. They'll refer to it now also as they found it in craniometry and everything before. This isn't genetics that we're talking about in this paper. This was simple craniometry, where someone can look at a skull and within seconds they go, oh, this is a black person. Or, oh, this is a Nordic. Or, oh, this is an Oriental. Oh, this is a Mediterranean, and so on. Let's get into it. These facts concerning Egyptian dilocephaly and orthocephaly reaffirm the conclusions of Elliott Smith back in 1911, based upon the examination of Egyptians from early dynastic times to the present-day population. This was read out in September 21st of 1938. If it's not well just thrown in your face, this is when they were looking at the population fluctuation over 7,000 years in Egypt. The study of this extraordinarily complete series of human remains, providing in a manner such as no other site has ever done, the materials for reconstruction of the racial history of one spot during more than 45 centuries, made it abundantly clear that these people whose remains were buried just before the induction of Islam to Egypt actually read back to that time. And that they were of the same flesh and blood as their forerunners in the same locality before the dawn of history. and 9 years experience in the anatomical department of the School of Medicine in Cairo, continues Elliot Smith, has left me in no doubt that the bulk of the present-day population of Egypt conforms to precisely the same racial type which has thus been dominant in the northern portion of the valley of the Nile for 60 centuries. Imagine that breadth of time that we're talking about here. They're going well into the pre-dynastic on through, and that there are correlation connections all the way through it. And this is exactly why she calls him joking monologue now. Did not provide his audience with a title or a link to the paper where they could see the information himself, because just like that video piece we showed before, all you have to do is clip off the last sentence and I can act ambiguous and lie. Why'd you cut that part out? Believe it or not, he made the mistake after that video came out. Somebody told him about it, and lo and behold, he got on and started strutting around like he wanted to do something and calling her names and things and asking her if she wanted to debate and all these other things. So she just, within about 3 or 4 texts here, just ran him right into the ground, and he ran off with his tail tucked. And he's not talking crap anymore, and I'm pretty sure after this video, he may want to delete his channel and see if he can find some other thing to lie about. But wait, what else does his own source say? Neolithic Egyptians were Nordics and Mediterraneans. What? Yeah, I've tried to show this to y'all. I don't go back into the 1930s or late 1800s or anything where they're going through this cranial thing. I just refer to it and stuff because some of it's boring and long-winded and in a lawyer type speech and stuff like that. But I really should have shown things like this probably a little more often. Here's one for you. In this same paper, which he attempted to use, they tell you that this flaxen-haired white race furnished the hypsidylocephalatic element which entered Egypt before the Badarian period. This is actually pre-proto-dynastic Egypt. And they also came in with a plethora of different things like domesticated cattle and grains and new knowledge. And the Natufian portion came in with a lot of knowledge and stonework and things, and together they all formed Voltron. Well, which one was the black people? There weren't any. The only possibility of there being one at this time would have been Nilotics, and they're unknown to the West Sub-Saharan primitives that lived in the Congo and not related whatsoever. But you'll find that what they do all the time is try to point to some other people they're not related to and go, we, especially if they have dark skin, which, if to be honest, all of a sudden leaves them without anything at all. And so they're sitting around pointing, well, I didn't do anything, but somebody over there did, which leaves them at this state that they didn't want to be in when they started to begin the lie in the first place. It's really self-defeating, but they try to do anything they can. Flaxen-haired, what does that mean? Well, I don't need to look it up or do anything. That's people with blonde hair. The blonde-haired white race furnished this pre-dynastic Egypt. Oh, I've been saying it for a while and showing you crystal blue-eyed statues and blonde mummies and a woman that was found with a mummy with Farrah Fawcett-looking hair, all crammed up under a black wig that we're common and seeing in the depictions on the wall. What? What does this all mean? Well, DNA has stepped up to the plate lately and said, bam, here it is. But I get people to tell me I'm Eurocentric or things like that, whenever I'm really just trying to follow the science and put it all together. Contradicting to his narrative and embarrassing. Now you know exactly why he hid the source. Afrocentrics just can't find sources that even agree with them, even ones they try to use over and over again. The parallelism between diencephaly and orthocephaly down to the corridors of historic time leaves no question but that the fundamental skull type characteristics of the Egyptian population, and therefore the brown or Mediterranean race, was orthodiscephalatic. Thus, Dixon's classification scheme is not sufficiently elastic group of all racial types, but we're talking about different types of Caucasians here. We also learn from this anthropometrical resume that when a considered number of diacephalic and brachiocephalic aliens become incorporated in this indigenous orthodiliocephalic, or right or medium long-headed, brown population. Now, oh my God, I said the word brown, and blacks are going to try to jump on that and clip everything out but that and then say something. But by brown population, they mean olive-skinned and Mediterranean type, which they'll explain in a minute. They leave an ineradicable impression upon the subsequent population. So they can see the people that it was that came in, and that made Egypt happen, form together, and become what we know of as Egypt today. In fact, they also mention at the period of the new empire, Dynasty 18, which is around King Tut and all that type thing. However, the brachiocephals finally returned to their previous force in the nobility and so on, and we find population samples reminiscent of the early dynastic period in respect to brachiocephaly. So again, what we're saying here is, well, 18th dynasty way down the road and proto-pre-dynastic all hook up together and go down through. There's slight variations on a theme there, but what they're saying here is the nobility that started it all off and led it all off in at least the first 5 or 6 dynasties and created the pyramids that we know about and everything else are from a Nordic type. And then there was a blend of Mediterranean types and a blend that goes on there for a while, but it came back in strength later, and they pointed out to be the 18th dynasty. Someone else made the same comment on the 12th dynasty. There was a variation on there, and in another paper in Ancient Times, they talked about how it had come back and reflexed again in the later dynasties, going 18th to 25th dynasty, which 25th is whenever we find these people of Nubians come in. So, but that's not a Negroid, and they're going to make clear discrepancies of that here in a paper from 1938. Akenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, they're brachiocephals. Well, how does that work? How does that work for you? In the other video I started off with, she goes into this and they showed it, and so it makes it a correlation, but he wanted to try to get you to believe this one thing that goes on. But as we've seen, he omitted the actual paper that it comes from, because if you read it, it destroys his narrative he's trying to push hilariously. And then the video component there, well, he just cut off her last sentence, which says, yeah, it's like a Whyte European people. Yeah, I know, oh, you're eccentric, oh, no, this is the reality of the way things happen. And let me tell you this, the ancient people that used to be around here had the same genetics, skulls, everything, than the modern Europeans do. In ancient of times, coming out of the last ice age, everybody was a lot more south. And it's entirely possible that different people went different places. Lo and behold, if we look at the major civilizations that started off during time, they all seem to have blue eyes hooked up with them and genetics that go back to a people that we used to be called Aryans. Sure, they mix with the local population, but they make it happen whenever it happens. In here, in Sumer, over in India, a lot of places. Let's not get into that and get off in left field. Let's look at this. Elliott Smith back in 1923 demonstrated the persistence of the fundamental indigenous brown or Mediterranean, not brown, but in actuality somebody that looks just like a white person that went out and got a suntan over a weekend. Olive skin. This type in Egypt from the earliest pre-dynastic times, circa 5000 BC down to the present day. Whoopsie. Morant in 1925 also, however, went far beyond this standpoint when he said as examples of types which were entirely unaffected for several thousand years by any influence foreign to their country, the ancient Egyptians may be well unparalleled in the history of the world. In other words, when they were looking at this from pre-dynastic all the way through, they're like, yeah, it's the same people. And whenever all these things happened, they didn't seem to get affected. This was the same thing that genetics tried to look at here recently, a couple of years back, through bodies in the necropolis of Abu Sir-Melek, and they still said that there's a continuity all the way through. The problem ensues that they tell you that after that, in post-Roman times, Negroid admix comes into the current people along with an Arabian influx, and therefore the current population has about a 1% connection, mainly in the Coptics, to the ancient Egyptians now. It's the name of the paper. I've showed it in a couple of videos recently and elder ones whenever the information came out. So Black Egypt falls on its face in a bucket of crap according to his own source. Oh, how self-exposing. The simple procedure followed by Retzius in 1842 of relying upon the cephalatic index or length-breadth relationship of European skulls to separate the diacephals or long heads of Europe from the coexisting brachiocephals or short heads, which may have there been traced to the Asiatic homeland. This had the cardinal importance in anthropology that attaches to a postulate in algebraic science. No lesser selective significance is attached, in my estimation, to the altitudinal index or length-height relationship of their skulls in correlation. I'm guessing is what the last word was. European could also express diocephalic index. But why does he deny that in his source and act like having that kind of skull means black people? Well, no, it means white people. In fact, one of our next numbers here, we're going to look at Nubians and what's said and how that changed to a skull type that he tried to refer of. Exactly the opposite of what he said. That the true Negro reached Egypt in appreciable quantities in Roman times is perhaps shown by the fact that Thompson and McIver, yes, they got McIver involved, were able to discover amongst their Negroid males at this time a remarkable rise in cephalic index in a small series comprising only 8 specimens, 5 of which were Platyrrhine, and concerning whom they say, lastly, in the Roman period, there is a striking fact that Negroid men appear. What are we saying here? They're saying that there never has been the true Negro, the West Sub-Saharan, ever show up anywhere until after this point. Like they missed the party in the boat. They showed up at July 11th and thought we were going to have a 4th of July party. Who belong to a type which is superior in cranial development to that of the contemporary natives, but even to the Romans, authentic Negroes were very little known. Basically an unknown people, or some people that were just getting found out about, and then of course exploited in the way that happened after that we all know of. But let's go back to a statement here. Amongst their Negroid males at this time, a remarkable rise in cephaletic index. What does that mean? That means post to this time, they had a smaller brain. And then these that show up are Negroids, but they have a bigger brain than a lot of specimens that they had looked at. Now, if we go back to Aslarman at 4400 BC, that's the last one, or the earliest that they've ever found of one that actually has a vaulted cranium. Everything below, such as Iwuliru, is still a 4 foot tall, football-headed, small brain, extant, still living, hominid type that's more akin to Homo erectus. In fact, during this time that we're in question, a lot of times they refer to blacks as perhaps a missing link somehow. That in between, because that's what they were seeing in the skulls, they were somehow trapped in between a Homo erectus and a modern human, and so they thought they should sit on the evolutionary chart about here. Of course, in a modern day, oh my God. But actually what they were looking at was a hybrid, wasn't it? And that prior to that hybridization around 4400 BC, they were still an extant hominid species. Doesn't really fit the idea of the whole, we slowly went up this hill and became the modern humans. Well, some people did. Other people never really evolved or changed in any way. Some try to crack it up to the idea that they never had interaction and stuff because once they did have interaction, their brain grew and da-da-da-da. But in fact, what we're looking at is the reality of the way things played out. Not some kid game, not some juvenile-minded idiot on parade trying to say something, but actual science. His own source reveals the Negroid to be invaders and not indigenous to Egypt, having arrived during the post-Roman era. And this is attested among the samples of Abu Sir that they see. And again, just recently, a couple of years back, they did this test from the Middle Kingdom on through because that's the time in question. That's the only time we know of that they got impinged upon. What happened to all this? Well, from proto-dynastic to that point, they all have this same type of morphology, hair, all these other things. But what changed? Well, amazingly, nothing really seemed to change until this post-Roman period when things changed to the way they are now. This physical fact that the real Negro had an inexorable importance in the population complex of ancient Egypt is fundamental to the understanding of Egypt itself. If you want to understand Egypt, understand that blacks had a negligible or unimportant, insignificant, and not worth considering. This is said by not her. This is said by his source that he tried to use and lie and say that it was black people. Straight out of that same paper. Knowing that he actually read that same paper but he clipped and pasted a little piece out there and left out something, and well, ambiguation like this is in a way a lie because you know the truth. Just like in the other video where he clipped out the last statement that the woman said. Ooh, now let's go into the Nubians. Because blacks quite often say, well, we were the Nubians. And it's like, no, you weren't the Nubians. You didn't know they existed. DNA steps up the plate and says, you're not even related. Archaeology steps up the plate and says, y'all have never even met. So why do you keep pointing at somebody else? Well, they can't point at themselves. There's no pyramids in sub-Saharan Africa over in the Congo. There were a pre-Neolithic people. So these other people over here that did have interaction started to have things. They were like, oh, we were the people that started to have things. Well, that isn't true at all. But the Nubian types that we talk about, whatever you want to call them, Kerma, Kush, and so on from later times or whatever, and people that were up in the Horn, not in Egypt, were the only ones that really had interaction with Egypt. So let's look at what archaeology says about that. In this same paper, this is hilariously sad. This guy grabbed information out of this paper, which whenever you read it says, oh no, he's a liar. To explain the high percentages of dilocomorphic hypocephaly found southward of the Sudan, I therefore boldly suggest that during the more congenial conditions of the last ice age in North Africa, Green Sahara and so on, the adventurous Nordic people of the Mediterranean littoral had migrated freely over the Sahara and had intermingled in the south with the northerly expanding Negro stock. They didn't used to live there in any way. They expanded north, and once they found somebody with advanced stuff, they couldn't bring themselves away from the border. Very much like more happened in a modern time in South Africa with apartheid, where they got locked behind a fence and weren't allowed to come in and try to ruin the civilization that other people had already created. But understand that behind that fence, they were saying things like, it was our ancestors that built that. White people stole it. If you want to see how that mentality works, look at my recent video on cargo cult. It'll explain what happened in World War II to a people and what they believe, and you'll actually see a reflection, slightly different, variations on a theme, if you will, of why and how this mentality comes out. How they're able to try to rationalize something and then come at the point where you actually owe them something. So from this Negro-Nordic admixture in the Western Sudan area, there thus emerged this hypocephalized Negroid stock, which thrust itself across the headwaters of the Nile, not down in Egypt, way up past the cataracts, inundated the eastern seaboard and ran like a torrent to the southern extremity of the continent. So way up there, and they run into the Horn area, and whoops, they went the other way. Well, in doing so, they took over the blacks that were in that area and hybridized with those, giving them also a larger cranial capacity, much like what happened to West Sub-Saharans far later. So we can see that ship sinking. It's kind of ironic that she uses the ship sinking, which we all know that metaphor, but they actually never had a boat. In fact, the thing that they try to claim where they found this one canoe at one time predates them actually being a modern human. And let me be straightforward and say that Homo erectus has never had any boats or anything. And that's from a time when there was a green Sahara. That's from a different people. people he's talking about, and the Nordics, along with the Mediterranean type people, how they formed this. Oh, it says it straight out. Oh, that's Eurocentric. No, this is reality. Afrocentric is a joke, where primitives are trying to claim that they built pyramids and stuff. Who actually did it? Well, these Nordics appear to be the ones that took over with Narmer and so on, and took them to the point that we know of as ancient Egypt. And that might seem strange to somebody if you didn't go, well, hold on, there's blue-eyed statues over here in Sumer that started it, and it's even before that, and there are iconographies that go across. What's up with all that? But it's a sinking ship. It's going down pretty quick. It's like the Titanic, and nobody's playing a song for it. See that ship go. You know, this makes me wonder if I should right now go turn around and flip to another page and go to Google Image or DuckDuckGo and show you all these different blonde and red-headed people from back when, like Khufu's granddaughter's a redhead and all these other ones, but how about all these crystal blue-eyed statues and reserve heads? You know, I tried to make a video presentation on Chief X's channel. We had talked about it somewhat, and then whenever I came on, instead of being just me talking him through it and figuring it out and going off of that, he invited some other people on, and then next thing you know, I got to show the reserve heads, and I said, do you see why the original people studying this area said Nordic while looking at the reserve heads? And he agreed with me. Then he wanted me to show Humwinu and so on, but then all of a sudden one of the other guys started talking Nature Boy, and he wanted to tell you that Buddha was a mushroom, well, a psychedelic mushroom and all this other stuff, and we went off in left field. And so I couldn't really even make my point that was supposed to be made there. Again, I feel like I make the ABCDs all the way down to Z, but I can't get past ABCD without something happening and trying to show different things. So after that, I talked to Chief about being able to show him, and I showed him a few things and had him look it up while I'm talking to him and stuff. And I somehow think that he doesn't want the real truth to come out. He just wants blacks to quit lying. Because too many times Chief X has said, well, they weren't white, but they weren't black. Whenever what we're finding here is that, yeah, they were white. In fact, we're looking at Nordic. In fact, we're looking at Aryans here, Proto-Indo-European type people that used to all live around the Black Sea area, and they also tell you all blue-eyed people come from the same population around the Yamnaya and so on that spread out with agriculture and all the things that they had at an earlier time and made down. And they've made connections where they blend in the Natufians, and the Natufians have connections to blend into some of the primordial stock that started off Egypt. But there was something that came in and kicked it all off. And what are they telling you it was? And hooked up with the nobility. It was a Nordic type people. And here's a shadow picture of E7 showing her right there. I don't know if you can kind of make it out, the shadow in her eye there. I'm telling you that's her. I know her. I'm telling you that's her, but I'm also telling you that there she looks like she's stern and researching something, and you probably don't want to see that look. But she looks quite different whenever she smiles. She looks quite different whenever she's got excited eyes and things like that. But let's just end this one with the idea that, oh my God, she just took that dude and ragdolled him all over the place. And let me tell you, she could take him word by word on all of his videos and just run him into the ground, but already he has nothing to stand on anymore, and he fell on his face in a bucket of shit. Really starting to think that you don't want to mess with her in any way, because if you put her to task, it's your ass. Kudos to E7 here on this showing. But also, isn't it amazing? She took his old source itself from the video and said, well, what's this you clipped out? Oh, she said there are white European people. And then what else? Well, of course, this all goes with Cleopatra and the idea there. And now we're able to finally talk about it because they tried to pretend Macedonians might actually have a Bantu component or something. I've even got a video waiting to come out. I told her I'd postpone it tonight because I wanted to see this because she says it's pretty hot. Didn't want me to tell me everything that was shown into it till it got shown out. Kind of like, surprise, open that package. But in doing so, I put off my video where blacks are actually trying to say that they were the Greeks. And they even try to say Plato said it and all this other stuff. Whenever you get into it, they've got to jump over 5 hurdles and straw men and all kinds of crap to come up with an idea of we were North African Caucasians and therefore we were the Greeks. It's pretty pathetic. But isn't all of this? Let me know what you think down below, and go to E7's channel. At least watch that video one time. Push a like up on it and so on. Peace.